big news, and perhaps unsurprising news this afternoon, is that Southampton have parted ways with their manager Ivan Jurić. Now, the reports earlier on suggested he'd walked away from them. He'd got them relegated over the weekend, turned round and went, thanks for the few months' work. I've got a few million quid in the bank off the back of it as well. I'm off now. Oh, and good luck in Championship next season. Turns out, not the case. He was, in fact, sacked by the Saints. And the one thing I will say, the statement Southampton put out was possibly the politest way I've ever seen a manager being sacked. They basically said he was sacked without saying he was sacked. Arguably the only thing the Southampton ownership have got right this season, the classiest thing they've done this season as well. Because the reality is this. Assuming Southampton don't beat Aston Villa at the weekend, they will have had more managers this season than wins in the Premier League. And I think that sums up Sports Republic. It's been a car crash of a season. I've got sympathy for their fans. I've actually got sympathy for Jurić as well. But I don't have sympathy for the board of Southampton. I think they've got what they deserve to some extent. Relegated at the weekend, Jurić is gone, and the timing makes sense because there's no point keeping him. The rebuild has to start immediately. It has to start now. And obviously the clause in his contract so that there's little to minimal compensation for Jurić as well. So the sacking makes sense. That's what I'm going to be discussing. But if you're new to Tartan Geo, please do subscribe. Why Tartan Geo? Well, because I'm Scottish and I'm a gobby man on the webcam that likes to discuss the Premier League and other football as well. So please do subscribe and also drop a like on the video as well by clicking thumbs up because it helps the video out and helps out the channel as well. I'm just getting started over here, so your support is much appreciated. Ivan Jurić, he's gone now. But when Southampton announced him, I never heard of him. I'm not going to pretend I knew who he was. I hadn't a Scooby. So I had to Google him. I had to read about him, listen about him, watch videos about him. And usually when a club signs a player or appoints a manager, the more I look into it, the more I think that's a good signing. Not with Jurić. The more I read and learned about him, the more convinced I became that he wasn't what Southampton needed. Because there was two ways of going about the appointment in terms of what Southampton required at that time. They decided to sack Russell Martin. We'll get onto that in a second. They now need to replace Russell Martin. You're either looking for someone to come in and perform a miracle. Because I've got sympathy for Jurić. He was dealt a bad hand. It was going to take something ridiculous to keep this Southampton team up. So you're looking for someone to come in and do that. Very, very unlikely. Or you're looking for someone to come in that's likely going to get relegated, but next season he will be the right man for the job in the Championship. And between now and then, you work the squad, you get your ideas across, so when you get relegated, you're in a good position to attack the Championship and get promoted immediately back to the Premier League. I felt that's what Southampton needed, one of them. I couldn't work out which one Jurić was meant to be. I don't think he was good enough. His footballing CV didn't scream like he was going to come in and keep Southampton up. But he also didn't scream that he was going to come in and stick around long enough to get Southampton back up. And I would argue I'm correct because he's been sacked and they've been relegated. So he won't get them back up and he hasn't kept them up. Now, like I said, I will give him a pass for not keeping them up. But I think the appointment felt weird at the time. Between then and now, I've been able to discover what Jurić is about to some extent based on what I've seen Southampton do. A shambles. Southampton were in a bad state when Russell Martin left. They weren't performing well. I would argue they've possibly even got worse. There's been some games where they had a bit of fight about them. There's a bit of character about them. I thought, all right, I can see what he's trying to do here to some extent. He's ripped up the way that Russell Martin insisted on playing, let's call it pretty football, possession-based football. But the players weren't good enough. So he's come in and abandoned that. But every time I watched Southampton, I felt like I was watching a different set of tactics. One match they were playing direct, the next match, there was one game I watched, they didn't even have a striker on the pitch, and Aribo was playing centre-back, and I thought, what on earth is going on here? I didn't get it. There was a lot of times I was watching Southampton confused at what Jurić was trying to do. At no point watching the Saints since his appointment have I watched it and thought they've got the right guy in the dugout now. None whatsoever. A terrible appointment by the board of Southampton. And like I said, I've got sympathy for him because I didn't think you could have put Pep Guardiola in there. They might have stayed up. But unless they were going to go get a top manager or stumble across someone that was like the equivalent of unearthing a gem in football when it comes to buying players, they weren't going to achieve what they wanted, which is Premier League survival. They would have had to significantly get better, but the teams outside of relegation zone would have had to get significantly worse. I would argue the teams outside of relegation zone, obviously not Everton, but Wolves they've improved a bit under Pereira. West Ham have got worse. There's been teams there for the taking maybe, but the Saints just didn't budge. 2 wins all season. The earliest team to be relegated from the Premier League in history. Now, it's not Jurić's fault, but he's contributed to it. He's played his part in that. Not the biggest one. I think the biggest fault is of the ownership of that club. In regards to replacing him, I think this is a massive appointment for the Saints. If they get this wrong, it could have severe consequences because they might not come straight back up. You're looking at the team that's going down. Some of those are good for the Championship. Cameron Archer, good for the Championship. There's certain players in that team that are at that level of being a top Championship player, like Flynn Downs, for example. Not good enough for the Premier League, maybe, but really good enough for the Championships. There's a good core of players to work with there, but they have to get it right. And if they do, they'll come back up. They could come back up next season. They could win the Championship next season. But what makes me reluctant to believe they'll do it isn't the playing squad, albeit it's not good enough for the Premier League. It's not the manager, because there isn't one. I have reservations over Southampton coming straight back up, and it's down to the board. This has been a poorly run club, in my opinion. When they came up 12 months ago, less than 12 months ago now, and you looked at how they played football, you thought you're not going to get away with that in the Premier League. And there was literally an example of it. While Southampton were getting promoted, there was the prime example in the Premier League getting relegated with Vincent Kompany's Burnley, trying to play nice football, trying to play football the right way. A manager who wouldn't alter his own philosophy, his own beliefs. Nah, I've got the way I want to play, and I'm playing it. Yeah, but you're getting beat. I don't care if we're getting beat. I don't care if we're getting relegated. I don't care if we're struggling. This is how I want to play. And it worked for Vincent Kompany. Got his move to Bayern Munich. Burnley went back to the Championship. Now, obviously, what we know now is they're probably going to get promoted again. But at that time, you didn't know that. So there was an example there of a club that had gone up, bought young players who may be good enough for the Premier League one day, but weren't at that point, playing a way that they couldn't succeed with in the Premier League. Luton made a more of a go at it, and they weren't playing pretty football. And it was almost like Russell Martin and Southampton ignored that and said, yeah, but it was almost a bit of arrogance. Like, yeah, but that's Burnley. This is Russell Martin and Southampton. We can do it. We're going to go up and play like that, and we're going to survive. And I think before a ball was even kicked this season, majority of people felt the Saints were going straight back down. And they've been proven correct. And I do think Russell Martin's played his part because he just wasn't willing to adapt. Possession-based football kept getting caught out. They went from being one of the best teams in the league to being one of the worst teams in the league literally overnight. But I think the biggest failure here comes from the transfer window. You look at the players they brought into Southampton. Overall, it's not really good enough for a Premier League team. And I think they paid their price. The top goal scorer is on 4 goals. I always think if you're a promoted side, you need to make sure you've got a goal scorer. Ipswich do, and they're still going back down. You need to make sure you've got someone that can get you a minimum of 10 goals a season. They don't have one. You need to make sure that you're capable of grinding out wins. They didn't have that. You need to make sure you can play ugly, make it difficult for the teams you're coming up against. They didn't have that. They were easy to play against. They didn't put fear into any team. And they didn't really make much of it. The earliest team to ever be relegated in Premier League history. Now, I think that says a lot about the Premier League as it does about Southampton. I think there's 2 sides to this story here. Especially with Leicester and Ipswich also going down last season, the 3 promoted sides getting relegated. You're looking at the sides coming up now, likely at the moment to be Burnley, Sheffield United, and one other, maybe Sunderland, to the playoffs. Because Leeds are just falling apart. But anyway, regardless, put Leeds in there, take your pick. You're looking at teams now and you think, you ain't going to survive in the Premier League. Like I said, I think there's an element of what it says about the Premier League as it does. But this video, I'm trying to keep it about Southampton. Russell Martin refused to budge from his philosophy and he paid the price. Unlike Vincent Kompany, he didn't have an owner and a chairman that was willing to back him right up until the end. He didn't have an owner that said, right, well, do or die together. If we get relegated, that's fine. The thing that the Burnley owner did wrong was assume Vincent Kompany would stick with him in the Championship. That's the thing he was most guilty of. Southampton didn't wait around, sacked Russell Martin. I understood why. It wasn't good enough. But Jurić had a bad hand. However, with the January transfer window, the issue was the club are going to make the same mistakes again. An inadequate window. And now they're at risk of being the worst ever team in the Premier League in terms of overall points total. And I think that's why it's important they got rid of Jurić, to give Rusk and Lallana a chance of just getting points on the board and not being that team. Don't be the team that's the worst ever team in the Premier League in terms of points. Or you can't be that. That's what they've got to play for between now and the end of the season. And I think they might manage it. Shackles are off. How often do we see a relegated team turn up for the last 2 or 3 games of the season because there's no pressure on them anymore? Well, the advantage of being the earliest team ever relegated from the Premier League is you've got more games than most to have that. Shackles off, let's get some points on the board, let's try and entertain the fans, give them something to sing about because they've not had much. But the appointment of Jurić should have been with one eye on next season, and it wasn't. It was with both eyes on this season, and that was incredibly naive of the Southampton board, I think, to suggest that if they got their appointment right, they'd have a chance of staying up. A, unlikely, and B, they were never going to get it right. They're not competent enough to have done that. And I think the proof is in the pudding. They've been relegated already. In regards to replacing him, I've seen him linked to role of Sheffield Wednesday. A punt, I think. I quite like him. I think he'd be a good appointment for some teams, whether he's good enough to get him promoted straight away. I would err on the side of yes, but I think it's because I'm a bit of a fan of him. I've seen Steve Cooper linked. While I'm not the biggest fan of Steve Cooper, I do think he's got what it takes. I think he would be possibly their best appointment to make, and to make it immediately. Because I think he will get them up. And he might have what it takes to keep them up as well. I never bought into, when he was sacked by Leicester, they were outside of relegation zone. I do feel like it was misleading in the sense that Leicester were getting battered. But I will say this, and I'll say it a little bit quietly. I won't, I'll just say it normally. But right now, I think Southampton have a better squad than Leicester's. Now, obviously, looking at the league table, you wouldn't think that. But I do. I think there's 1 or 2 players in that Southampton squad. Put it this way. If West Ham were going after players, if I had to write a list of 10, 15 players I would like at West Ham from sides getting relegated, there'd only be 1 or 2 Leicester ones on there. There'd be 3 or 4, mainly Ipswich ones, but there'd certainly be 3 or 4 Southampton ones on there. Granted, one of them isn't even owned by Southampton, he's at Chelsea, but my point is, I think there's something there to work with, and I think Cooper could be the guy that goes in there and is able to work with what he's got. But the Saints really need to make sure they get this transfer window right, because they got the last one wrong. Like I said, I think there's another side of it, which is how difficult it is for a promoted side to come up and stay up. But this is about Southampton and Jurić. It's not been good enough for the board. I actually have quite a lot of sympathy for Southampton fans because of what they've had to watch and witness this season. Basically, they've had an entire season, because of the failings of the board, they've had an entire season of no hope. And if you don't have hope in football, what do you want? Everyone wants different things out of football. But what I want personally, I want emotion, I want fun, and I want hope. Well, Southampton probably had a lot of emotion, but not good ones. We've had no fun. And before a ball was even kicked this season, I would argue they've had no hope. Almost what's the point? And if they do come back up next season, they really have to learn from their mistakes, because what they can't do is go, we got the appointment wrong and that was it. That's not the only thing that's happened here. It's not down to Jurić Southampton got relegated. It's down to the board of Southampton. In my opinion, of course, anyway. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've already clicked the like button by clicking thumbs up, thank you. I appreciate you. If you're yet to do it, please do. You stuck around to the end, so either you're bored, you can't reach the buttons or your phone to turn it off, or you perhaps even enjoyed the content. So drop a like on it, and also subscribe me to Tartan Geo, and I'll catch up with you in a bit.